The summer heat draped itself over Charlotte, a thick, suffocating blanket that melted the asphalt on the streets and made the air hang heavy and damp. Inside the cool, dim confines of her suburban bedroom, Maya Johnson sat bathed in the glow of her laptop screen. She was 21, an age that suggested burgeoning adulthood and open horizons. Yet the weight she carried in her chest felt ancient, a burden far exceeding her years. Her eyes, though fixed on the digital display, saw nothing of the web pages or applications open before her. Instead, her mind drifted, pulled back relentlessly into the shadowed landscape of her past, a terrain mapped with years of accumulated slights, fractured promises, and the gnawing ache of feeling utterly invisible. Her father, Marcus Johnson, a man sculpted by success in the demanding world of financial consulting, resided under the same roof. He moved through the spacious house with an air of earned confidence, his presence a constant reminder of his achievements. Yet between him and Maya stretched an emotional chasm, wide and seemingly unbridgeable. Since the divorce that had fractured their family unit several years prior, Marcus had plunged himself into his career and the construction of a new life, one that revolved around his professional accomplishments and social engagements. For Maya, only fragments of his attention remained, scattered like loose change. She was left with the persistent, painful impression of being little more than an inconvenient relic of a past he preferred to forget, a living footnote to a chapter he had decisively closed. The memories flickered behind her eyes, sharp and distinct, despite the passage of time. She recalled the sting of sitting alone in auditoriums during school plays, where other parents beamed, her own father's seat conspicuously empty due to a last-minute, unavoidable meeting. There were the award ceremonies where her name was called, the brief surge of pride instantly dampened by the absence of the one person whose validation she craved most. She remembered the sports events, the sidelines lacking his familiar figure, his support offered later, if at all, through a distracted phone call. Planned weekend trips, meticulously anticipated, evaporated with casual apologies about work deadlines or unexpected client demands. A concert they were supposed to attend together, a rare bridge tentatively extended, dissolved into another evening she spent alone, the silence amplifying her disappointment. Their conversations, when they occurred, felt like navigating shallow waters. She would attempt to share a piece of her life, a struggle with a college course, a conflict with a friend, a flicker of artistic ambition, only to watch his attention drift. His responses were often perfunctory, his gaze distant, his mind clearly elsewhere. More often than not, he would skillfully pivot the conversation back to his own world. A successful deal closed, a challenging client navigated, a frustration with the market. Her experiences, her feelings, her very existence seemed to shrink in the shadow of his self-absorption, dismissed or minimized until they felt insignificant even to her. The divorce had been the catalyst, cleaving the family structure, but his subsequent retreat into his own sphere had cemented her isolation. It felt as if acknowledging her fully meant acknowledging the failure of his marriage, a reality he seemed determined to keep at arm's length. Within Maya, this steady drip of neglect and emotional abandonment had cultivated a cold, hard kernel of bitterness. It grew slowly, insidiously, like a frost spreading through soil, hardening her heart, chilling her outlook. It wasn't loud or explosive, but a quiet, persistent ache that demanded release, an outlet for the years of swallowed hurt. The resentment festered, evolving into a potent desire for retribution. She longed to shatter his complacency, to force him to truly see her, not as a peripheral figure in his well-ordered life, but as a person capable of deep feeling, including the profound pain he had inflicted, however unintentionally. She craved an act that would make him feel, truly feel, even a fraction of the loneliness and insignificance that had become her constant companions. The idea surfaced not in a flash of anger, but with a chilling clarity, sly and opportunistic. It took root as she stared at the impersonal glow of the laptop screen, the gateway to a world of virtual connections and carefully constructed identities. The internet offered the perfect tools: anonymity, the power to create illusions, a shield from behind which she could operate unseen. It was a weapon ideally suited for her purpose, a means to infiltrate his carefully guarded world and strike at his vulnerabilities without revealing her hand. The screen, with its endless possibilities, seemed to shimmer with a dark promise, offering a path to the reckoning she felt she was owed. The plan began to form, intricate and venomous, like a spider meticulously weaving its web, waiting patiently for its unsuspecting prey. Maya transitioned from thought to action with the detached precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex procedure. There was no hesitation, only a cold, focused resolve. The first step was selecting the right platform, a popular dating website frequented by professionals in Marcus's demographic, a digital pond where he was likely already swimming or might easily be tempted to cast a line. She navigated the sign-up process with swift efficiency, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The name came easily. Serafina Jones. It sounded elegant yet approachable, common enough to blend in, carrying no specific regional or familial markers that might inadvertently raise suspicion. It was a blank slate upon which she could paint her elaborate fiction. The visual identity of Serafina required careful curation. Maya bypassed her own photos, delving instead into the vast anonymous ocean of online images. She searched for hours, scrolling through countless faces until she found the perfect representation. It was a woman likely in her early 40s, possessing a warm, inviting smile that reached kind eyes. Her features were attractive but not intimidatingly glamorous, exuding an air of quiet confidence and approachability. There was a hint of sophistication in her posture, perhaps a subtle suggestion of shared social standing, but also a softness that implied empathy and understanding. It was precisely the type of woman Maya knew her father found appealing. Successful yet seemingly nurturing, independent but hinting at a desire for companionship. She saved several pictures, capturing Serafina in different settings. A candid shot laughing at an outdoor cafe, a more thoughtful pose with a book, a professional-looking headshot, to create a semblance of a real, multifaceted life. Next came the biography, the narrative heart of the deception. Maya crafted Serafina's story with meticulous attention to detail, seeding it with elements designed to resonate specifically with Marcus. Serafina was presented as a recent transplant to Charlotte, perhaps relocated for a vague but respectable job, subtly conveying a sense of being unmoored and seeking connection in a new city. This fabricated loneliness was a key lure. She wrote of Serafina's appreciation for the finer things Marcus enjoyed: smooth jazz filtering through dimly lit clubs, the complex notes of a good Cabernet Sauvignon, the simple pleasure of quiet evenings spent in meaningful conversation rather than chasing fleeting excitement. These were not just random interests. They were reflections of Marcus's own stated preferences, gleaned from years of half-listened-to remarks and observed habits. Beneath the surface details, Maya wove a deeper understanding of her father's psyche into the profile. She knew his professional success masked certain insecurities, his outward confidence occasionally revealing glimpses of a need for validation and admiration. She understood his longing, perhaps unspoken even to himself, for a partner who offered unwavering support and understanding, someone who saw the man behind the financial advisor persona. Serafina's profile hinted at this capacity for deep empathy, suggesting a woman who valued emotional intimacy and intellectual connection. It was a carefully constructed mirror, reflecting back Marcus's own desires and perceived needs. With the profile complete, a perfect digital phantom brought to life, Maya initiated contact. The first message was deliberately brief, almost casual, yet intriguing. It referenced something innocuous, perhaps a shared observation about Charlotte, or a comment on a general interest listed on his own profile, if he had one, or sent as a simple, elegant introduction if he didn't. It was designed to pique his curiosity without appearing overly eager or forward. The reply arrived sooner than she had anticipated, a testament to either his existing online activity or the effectiveness of Serafina's carefully designed allure. His initial messages were guarded, polite but non-committal, the responses of a man accustomed to maintaining a degree of professional distance, even in personal interactions. But Maya, cloaked in the persona of Serafina, possessed a patience born of simmering resentment. She played her role masterfully. Her replies were consistently warm, intelligent, and engaging. She employed subtle flattery, praising his insights or accomplishments when he obliquely mentioned them, validating his opinions. She demonstrated, or rather expertly feigned, a deep understanding of the pressures he likely faced, offering empathetic responses that made him feel seen and heard in a way he perhaps hadn't been recently. Slowly, meticulously, she chipped away at his reserve. She introduced light, charming flirtation, never overtly sexual, but suggestive of a growing attraction and shared chemistry. She asked thoughtful questions, drawing him out, encouraging him to share more about himself while revealing only carefully curated, fictional details about Serafina. The pacing was crucial. She never pushed too hard, allowing him to set the tempo, making him feel in control of the unfolding connection. Day by day, the digital threads binding Marcus to Serafina grew stronger. The frequency of their messages increased, the content deepening from polite exchanges to more personal disclosures. He began to share his frustrations with work, his reflections on life, his hopes for the future, thoughts and feelings he rarely, if ever, voiced to Maya. He spoke of his successes with a touch of vulnerability, seeking Serafina's, and unknowingly, Maya's admiration. He confided his disappointments, finding solace in her seemingly sympathetic responses. Serafina became his digital confessor, his unseen confidant. Maya read his increasingly intimate messages with a complex mix of emotions swirling within her. There was a chilling, undeniable satisfaction in seeing her plan unfold so flawlessly, watching him walk willingly into the trap she had set. His vulnerability, his eagerness to connect with this illusion, was proof of her power over him. Yet alongside the cold triumph, there was a familiar, bitter ache. Every heartfelt word he typed to Serafina was a stark reminder of the emotional chasm between him and his actual daughter. The ease with which he poured out his soul to a phantom underscored the profound difficulty he had connecting with her, the living, breathing person sharing his home. This bitter confirmation fueled her resolve, extinguishing any flicker of doubt or pity. He was revealing the very flaws, the very neglect that had driven her to this act in the first place. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and Maya felt only the grim determination to see it through. The initial weeks of guarded messages steadily bled into months, each passing day deepening the digital tapestry Maya wove around her father. The connection between Marcus and the fictional Serafina flourished in the fertile ground of the internet, nurtured by carefully crafted words and meticulously timed responses. Their communication evolved beyond the constraints of the dating site's messaging system, expanding into lengthy emails exchanged late at night or during stolen moments in Marcus's workday. He wrote to Serafina with an openness Maya had never witnessed, detailing the minutiae of his days, the stressful negotiations, the satisfying client breakthroughs, the mundane frustrations of traffic or office politics. He shared his ambitions, painting pictures of a future that increasingly featured the elegant, understanding woman he knew only through text and photos. Serafina became the repository for his thoughts, the silent audience for his internal monologue. The effects of this burgeoning online romance began to ripple outwards, subtly altering the patterns of Marcus's life. At the office, colleagues noted a slight dip in his usual laser focus. He seemed more easily distracted, occasionally lost in thought, a faint, preoccupied smile playing on his lips. At home, he retreated more frequently into the solitude of his study or spent longer hours ostensibly working on his laptop, though Maya knew his attention was often captured by the glowing chat window connecting him to Serafina. His phone, once primarily a tool for business, became a constant companion, checked obsessively for new messages, its screen often illuminating his face with a soft glow that Maya hadn't seen directed her way in years. The rare smiles he offered in passing felt different now, less connected to the present moment, more like echoes of a private, hidden joy. He began to speak of Serafina, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, not as a profile on a website, but as a real person who had profoundly entered his life. He described her to the few colleagues he confided in, painting a portrait of an intelligent, empathetic woman who truly understood him. He used phrases like kindred spirit and soulmate, words imbued with a sense of discovery and profound connection. He spoke of shared values and intellectual sparks, convinced he had found a rare alignment of minds and hearts. The illusion had taken root so deeply that it began to reshape his perception of reality. He started making plans, not just vague notions, but concrete ideas for a future that included her. Weekend getaways to Asheville they might take, restaurants in Charlotte he wanted to show her, even idle thoughts about how she might redecorate a room in his house. The disconnect became palpable, almost painfully absurd to Maya. She observed him one afternoon as he returned from a shopping trip, discreetly tucking away a small, elegantly wrapped jeweler's box. A gift clearly intended for Serafina, a woman who couldn't receive it. She overheard snippets of phone calls where he meticulously planned hypothetical dates, discussing potential meeting spots and activities with an earnestness that bordered on the heartbreaking, all for encounters that could never materialize. His dependence on this digital phantom grew with each passing week. The constant validation, the perceived unconditional understanding Serafina offered, became an emotional crutch, filling a void he perhaps hadn't fully acknowledged until she appeared. This manufactured intimacy made him increasingly vulnerable. His emotional defenses lowered, his judgment clouded by the potent allure of the fantasy. From her vantage point in the next room, or sometimes even across the dinner table during their increasingly infrequent shared meals, Maya watched this transformation with a chilling sense of accomplishment. Her plan was not just working, it was exceeding her expectations. Her father, the self-assured, emotionally guarded man she knew, was completely ensnared. He poured his heart out to an avatar, lavishing affection and intimacy on a construct of her own making, while remaining oblivious to the architect of his emotional awakening, sitting mere feet away. The ease with which he offered his trust and vulnerability to Serafina served as a constant, painful contrast to the emotional walls he maintained with her. Occasionally, late at night, reading a particularly poignant email from Marcus to Serafina, one detailing a past hurt or a quiet fear, Maya felt an unexpected flicker of something complex within her. It wasn't pity, not exactly. Perhaps it was a fleeting, uncomfortable recognition of his underlying loneliness, the same loneliness that mirrored her own in a twisted way. It was a glimpse of the flawed human man beneath the neglectful father figure. But these moments were brief, quickly submerged beneath the tidal wave of her accumulated resentment and the driving force of her quest for retribution. Any nascent empathy was snuffed out by the memory of another slight, another broken promise, another instance of feeling unseen. His current vulnerability only served as further proof of his past failings in her eyes. Instead of softening her resolve, these glimpses hardened it. She refined her portrayal of Serafina, making her even more attuned to his needs, more ideal, more indispensable. She skillfully amplified the illusion, pushing him further down the path of emotional dependency, deliberately leading him toward the precipice from which his fall would be all the more devastating. Inevitably, the constraints of the digital world began to chafe against the intensity of Marx's feelings. The constant exchange of messages, the late-night emails, the carefully curated photos, they were no longer enough. Fueled by months of deepening emotional investment and the intoxicating belief that he had found his perfect counterpart, Marcus started to push for the tangible. He yearned to bridge the gap between the screen and reality. His messages took on a new urgency, expressing a desire to hear Serafina's voice unfiltered by technology, to see the smile he had only witnessed in static images, to feel the simple warmth of her presence in the same room. He painted vivid pictures of what their first meeting could be like, his longing palpable even through the typed words. He needed confirmation that the woman who had captured his heart was real, solid, touchable. For Maya, this escalating insistence was the anticipated cue, the signal that the endgame was approaching. His desire for a real-world encounter marked the transition point from emotional manipulation to the final, devastating act of revelation. The time had come to orchestrate the collapse of the elaborate fantasy she had constructed. The goal remained unchanged: maximum humiliation, a shattering of his illusions so profound it would leave him irrevocably broken. She needed to engineer a scenario where the contrast between his heightened expectations and the brutal reality would be most acute. Cloaked in the reassuring persona of Serafina, Maya responded to his pleas with apparent understanding and shared anticipation. She feigned her own desire to finally meet, validating his feelings while subtly taking control of the arrangements. She agreed to the meeting, framing it as the natural, exciting culmination of their unique connection. However, she steered the planning away from his suggestions of neutral, public venues like restaurants or cafes, instead invoking a desire for privacy and a truly intimate setting for such a significant moment. Serafina proposed that Marcus come to her place. The masterstroke, delivered with calculated audacity, was the address she provided, their own home. She presented it as Serafina's residence, perhaps mentioning a recent move or house-sitting arrangement to explain any potential familiarity he might feel later, though she banked on his emotional blindness to prevent any immediate recognition. The rationale she offered was plausible within the context of their manufactured intimacy, a desire to avoid the prying eyes of strangers, to create a comfortable, relaxed atmosphere where they could truly connect without distractions. She knew his judgment was compromised, his critical thinking dulled by infatuation. She gambled that the absurdity of being invited to his own house under the guise of visiting his online love would be lost on him, obscured by the fog of his eagerness. The timing of the rendezvous was chosen with equal deliberation and cruelty. Maya selected a specific date, one deeply etched in her own memory, the anniversary of a significant childhood event, perhaps a birthday or a school achievement, that Marcus had completely overlooked years ago. It was a date that symbolized his neglect, a painful milestone lost in the shuffle of his self-involved life. While the significance would be lost on him initially, Maya intended it as a silent, final twist of the knife, a personal marker embedded within the structure of her revenge, underscoring the very obliviousness she sought to punish. As the appointed day dawned, a nervous energy permeated the house, emanating palpably from Marcus. He was transformed, shed of his usual controlled demeanor, replaced by an almost boyish excitement mixed with palpable anxiety. Maya observed him from the periphery, a silent, detached witness to his preparations. He spent an unusual amount of time selecting his clothes, trying on different combinations, seeking an impression of casual elegance. She saw him meticulously grooming himself, a level of care she hadn't seen him exhibit in years. Later, he returned home with an extravagant bouquet of flowers, roses, perhaps, or lilies, chosen with care for the woman he was about to meet. His eyes held a bright, feverish anticipation, a spark of happiness that felt alien and unnerving in the context of Maya's plan. He resembled a teenager nervously preparing for a first date, brimming with hope and vulnerability. Watching him, Maya maintained her outward composure, a mask of cool indifference. Yet beneath the surface, a faint, unfamiliar tremor ran through her. A tiny worm of doubt, a flicker of unease, began to stir in the pit of her stomach. Seeing his undisguised joy, his complete immersion in the fantasy she had spun, sparked a fleeting sense of the profound depth of the cruelty she was about to inflict. Was the punishment proportionate to the crime? Had the game born of pain and resentment spiraled into something monstrous, something beyond her control? The thought was quickly suppressed. She had come too far. The intricate mechanism of her revenge was already in motion, clicking inexorably toward its conclusion. Retreat was not an option. The bitterness, the years of feeling invisible, surged back, reinforcing her resolve. He needed to learn, needed to feel the crash. She steadied herself, pushing down the nascent flicker of conscience, readying herself for the final curtain call. As evening descended, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, Marcus approached the front door of his own house. The familiar architecture seemed strangely distant, merely the backdrop for the momentous event about to unfold. In his hand, he clutched the bouquet of expensive flowers, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the churning anxiety and elation within him. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation. This was it, the moment he would finally meet Serafina, the woman who had illuminated his world from afar. He took a deep, steadying breath and pressed the doorbell, the chime echoing strangely in the suddenly quiet twilight. The door swung open, not revealing the warm, inviting face from the photographs he cherished, but the familiar yet disturbingly impassive features of his daughter, Maya. She stood framed in the doorway, her expression unreadable, devoid of the usual teenage sullenness or indifference. There was no smile of greeting, only a cool, appraising stillness in her eyes that immediately set him on edge. Confusion washed over Marcus. His expectant smile faltered, then slowly dissolved. He had mentally rehearsed this moment countless times, envisioning Serafina's embrace, her voice, her presence. Maya's appearance was a jarring dissonance, a wrong note in the symphony he had composed in his mind. His initial bewilderment quickly curdled into irritation. He shifted his weight, craning his neck slightly, attempting to peer past Maya into the hallway behind her, searching for the woman he had come to see. Perhaps Maya was just answering the door for her? His mind scrambled for a logical explanation, refusing to accept the disruption to his fantasy. He opened his mouth to ask where Serafina was, but before he could form the words, Maya spoke. Her voice was unnervingly calm, devoid of any discernible emotion, yet each word landed like a precisely aimed blow. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gesture wildly. She simply stood there and methodically dismantled his entire world. She explained everything. The carefully constructed fake profile, the borrowed photographs, the meticulously crafted personality. She recounted the months of calculated deception, the way she had studied his desires and vulnerabilities, feeding him exactly what he wanted to hear. She laid bare the entire artifice, culminating in the final, devastating truth. Serafina Jones had never existed. There was no recent transplant seeking connection, no kindred spirit waiting behind the screen. There was only her. Maya was Serafina. He watched her lips move, heard the words, but his brain struggled to process the enormity of the revelation. It felt like a physical impact, knocking the air from his lungs. His first reaction was sheer disbelief, a primal denial. This had to be some kind of cruel, elaborate joke, a misguided prank. He stared at Maya, searching her face for any sign of duplicity, any hint that this was not real. But her steady, unwavering gaze offered no escape. Then the fragile shell of denial cracked, and the horrific truth began to seep in, cold and sickening. Comprehension dawned, bringing with it a crushing wave of shame that washed over him, hot and suffocating. Every intimate confession he had made, every vulnerability he had shared, every heartfelt word he had typed, all of it had been directed at his own daughter, masquerading as his ideal woman. The image of Serafina, the beacon of hope and understanding in his life, shattered into a million pieces, dissolving into the mocking, impassive face of Maya. The foundation of his emotional resurgence crumbled beneath him, revealing the rotten core of the deception. He saw himself reflected in her eyes, a fool, easily manipulated, blinded by his own loneliness and desires. The profound sense of betrayal, sharp and agonizing, twisted in his gut. It wasn't just the loss of Serafina, the phantom lover. It was the violation perpetrated by his own flesh and blood. His daughter had meticulously orchestrated his emotional downfall, playing on his deepest needs purely to inflict pain, to humiliate him. The pain quickly ignited into a white-hot rage, fueled by the unbearable weight of his shame and the utter destruction of his hopes. All his dreams of a renewed life, the fragile sense of happiness he had cultivated, the belief that he had finally found connection, all of it exposed as a grotesque charade. His vision seemed to tunnel, the familiar surroundings of his own hallway becoming distorted and menacing. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing in on him. He looked at Maya, but he no longer saw his daughter. He saw the architect of his agony, the embodiment of his deepest humiliation, the source of an unbearable psychic pain. In that instant, something inside him snapped. Reason fled, replaced by a primal, uncontrollable fury. He took a step toward her, his movements jerky, mechanical. A flicker of surprise, then dawning horror, registered in Maya's eyes. This raw, violent reaction was not part of her script. The cold triumph she might have felt vanished, replaced by the terrifying realization of the beast she had unleashed. A cry caught in her throat as his hands shot out, strong fingers closing around her neck with brutal force. The carefully constructed revenge plot dissolved into a raw, desperate struggle for survival. But the fight was tragically brief, uneven. His strength, amplified by rage and despair, quickly overwhelmed her. A sickening silence fell over the room, broken only by Marcus's ragged, gasping breaths and the sight of his daughter's lifeless form crumpled on the polished floorboards at his feet. The roaring in Marcus's ears subsided, replaced by a deafening silence that pressed in from all sides. For a single frozen moment, he stared down at the still figure on the floor, his chest heaving, his hands tingling with the phantom pressure of Maya's throat. The red haze of rage receded, leaving behind a desolate landscape of shock. Then, like ice water injected directly into his veins, came the horror. Cold, paralyzing, absolute. The full weight of his action crashed down upon him with physical force. Serafina, the anchor of his emotional world, had evaporated into the cruel fiction she always was. Maya, his daughter, the flesh and blood reality he had neglected and now destroyed, lay dead at his feet. And he, Marcus Johnson, successful consultant, respected member of the community, was a murderer. This realization triggered not grief or remorse, not yet, but a primal, overriding instinct for self-preservation. Panic clawed its way up his throat, sharp and urgent. He couldn't undo what he had done, but he couldn't be discovered. The thought of exposure, of flashing lights, handcuffs, the ruin of his carefully constructed life spurred him into frantic motion. Adrenaline surged, sharpening his senses while simultaneously numbing his emotions. He moved with a desperate, feverish energy, his mind racing, calculating, planning, the body, the evidence. He had to erase this moment, bury it as deeply as possible. Night offered its concealing cloak. He hurried to the garage, his steps echoing unnaturally in the sudden stillness of the house. His eyes scanned the dim space, landing on a pile of old, heavy moving blankets in a corner. He grabbed one, its rough texture coarse against his trembling hands. Returning to the living room, he forced himself to approach Maya's body. He couldn't bring himself to look directly at her face, at the vacant stare that would surely accuse him. Averting his gaze, working with clumsy, urgent movements, he wrapped her small frame in the thick, dusty blanket, creating a heavy, anonymous bundle. The sheer physicality of the task was staggering. The weight of her felt immense, disproportionate, a burden that went far beyond mere pounds. With Herculean effort, fueled by terror, he lifted the wrapped body. He listened intently for any sound from outside, straining his ears against the frantic thumping of his own heart. Under the cover of the deep twilight, he carried his terrible burden through the house and out the back door, avoiding the front entrance where the accusing bouquet still lay. He navigated the path to his car, parked in the driveway, his muscles screaming with exertion and dread. Opening the trunk felt like uncovering a tomb. He maneuvered the body inside, arranging the blanket to conceal its shape as much as possible, before slamming the lid shut with a dull, final thud. The drive to Lake Norman stretched into an eternity. He drove automatically, his hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity, his eyes fixed on the road ahead but seeing nothing. The familiar route felt alien, menacing in the darkness. Inside the car, the silence was absolute, suffocating. It was broken only by the low hum of the engine and the sound of his own breathing. Shallow, ragged gasps that did little to calm the frantic pounding in his chest. Every shadow seemed to leap out at him. Every pair of headlights in the distance felt like an accusation. He imagined the weight in the trunk shifting, a horrifying thought that sent fresh waves of nausea through him. Finally, he reached the shores of the vast, dark lake. He pulled off the main road, following a less traveled path until he found a secluded spot shrouded by trees, far from any houses or boat ramps. The water lay before him, a vast expanse of black, still glass reflecting the faint starlight. It looked cold, deep, and indifferent, a perfect repository for a secret too monstrous to bear. He cut the engine, plunging the immediate surroundings into an even deeper silence. Getting the body out of the trunk required another surge of adrenaline-fueled strength. The bundle felt heavier now, imbued with the finality of its destination. He dragged it towards the water's edge, stumbling on the uneven ground, his breath catching in painful sobs. Standing on the bank, he hesitated for only a second. Then, with a final, desperate heave, he pushed the blanket-wrapped form into the cold, dark water. It entered with a surprisingly quiet splash, the sound quickly swallowed by the immense stillness of the lake. Ripples spread outwards for a moment, disturbing the placid surface, before vanishing. The body sank quickly, disappearing into the black depths without further trace, as if the lake itself had conspired to keep his secret, pulling the evidence down into its silent, watery embrace. The drive back was a blur of numbness and encroaching despair. When Marcus finally stepped back into his house, it felt hollow, cavernous, profoundly empty. The silence that greeted him was no longer just the absence of sound, but a heavy, oppressive presence that seemed to emanate from the very walls. His gaze fell upon the vibrant bouquet lying abandoned on the entryway floor, a grotesque monument to the illusion that had precipitated this nightmare. The sight sent a fresh wave of revulsion through him. Mechanically, methodically, he began to erase the traces of the evening's horror. He cleaned the spot on the floor where Maya had fallen, scrubbing away any imagined mark. He straightened the furniture, restoring the room to its usual pristine order, as if imposing normalcy on the space could somehow counteract the chaos raging within him. His meticulously ordered world had imploded. The carefully constructed fantasy of Serafina, the illusion of love and understanding, had led not to fulfillment, but to unimaginable violence and death. Maya's bitter quest for revenge had culminated in a tragedy that consumed them both, leaving only devastation in its wake. He stood alone in the center of his silent, perfect house, a prisoner of his own actions. The crushing weight of his guilt pressed down on him, inescapable, and with it came the terrible, biting irony. He had finally been forced to see his daughter, to acknowledge her impact on his life, but only in the horrifying clarity of her death, engineered by his own hand. The price of that recognition was unbearable. The Charlotte night remained quiet, but for Marcus, the silence would forever echo with the weight of his secret, now buried beneath the dark, still waters of the lake.